Klaus stared at the white sheet hanging on the wall and rubbed his eyes. After months of fighting in North Africa, then weeks on a transport ship to America, he thought he was seeing things. American guards were setting up a movie projector for German prisoners in a prison camp? He turned to his friend Otto and whispered, "Are they really going to show us films?" Otto shrugged. "Maybe it's propaganda. Maybe it's torture." But when the lights dimmed and Charlie Chaplin appeared on screen, both men forgot they were prisoners of war. The year was 1943. Thousands of German soldiers had been captured and shipped to camps across the United States. They expected brutality. They expected starvation. They expected death. What they got instead was something no Nazi propaganda had prepared them for. They got movie nights. Picture this. You're a German soldier who's been taught that Americans are savage enemies. You surrender, expecting the worst. Instead, someone hands you popcorn and shows you Hollywood musicals. How would your mind handle that shock? When German POWs first arrived in American camps, they couldn't believe their eyes. Clean barracks with real beds, hot meals 3 times a day, medical care when they got sick. Some prisoners thought it was a trick. They whispered, "They're fattening us up for something worse." But nothing worse came. Instead, the Americans did something even more confusing. They entertained them. The first movie night happened almost by accident. A camp commander thought films might keep the prisoners busy and prevent escape attempts. He had no idea he was about to change how these men saw America forever. The makeshift theater was just a dining hall with benches and a white sheet nailed to the wall. But when that projector started rolling, magic happened. German soldiers who had spent years hearing about American weakness and corruption suddenly watched stories of courage, humor, and hope. The first film was a comedy. Within minutes, hardened Wehrmacht veterans were laughing out loud. Some covered their mouths, embarrassed by their own laughter. Others looked around nervously, as if enjoying American entertainment was betraying their homeland. But they couldn't help themselves. The films were unlike anything they had seen in Germany. Nazi movies were heavy with propaganda, filled with marching and speeches about racial superiority. American films were different. They celebrated the underdog. They mocked authority figures. They showed ordinary people achieving extraordinary things through wit and courage. One prisoner later wrote home, "The Americans show us their films every week. I cannot understand why they waste electricity on their enemies. But I must admit, for 2 hours, I forget I am a prisoner." The variety amazed them. Westerns with endless landscapes and clear battles between good and evil. Musicals where people burst into song and dance as if life itself was celebration. Romances where women spoke their minds and chose their own paths. German soldiers raised under strict Nazi gender roles sat stunned as they watched Katharine Hepburn or Bette Davis command the screen with confidence and intelligence. These weren't the submissive wives their propaganda had told them American women were supposed to be. The abundance shown in these films shocked them most of all. Characters casually threw away food. Families owned cars. Children had toys. Stores overflowed with goods. For prisoners who knew their families back home were surviving on ration cards and horse meat, these images were almost painful to watch. How can they fight a war and still live like this? One prisoner asked another after watching a film about American teenagers going to high school dances. The question haunted many of them. If America could afford such luxury during wartime, what did that say about German chances of victory? The guards noticed the change in the prisoners' behavior. Men who had arrived angry and defiant gradually became quieter, more thoughtful. Instead of plotting escape or nursing hatred, They discussed favorite actors and debated movie plots during work details. Some camp commanders worried the films were making the prisoners too comfortable, but others argued that happy prisoners were easier to manage than desperate ones. The movie nights continued. Young German soldiers began learning English phrases from the films. They practiced American accents. They asked guards about Hollywood stars. Some even requested specific movies. "Can we see another cowboy film?" became a common question. The transformation wasn't just about entertainment. These films were showing the prisoners a different version of America than the one they had been taught to hate. Instead of a nation of weaklings corrupted by Jewish influence, they saw a country full of energy, creativity, and surprising strength. American films didn't hide problems. They showed poverty, crime, and social issues. But they also showed people working together to overcome these problems. They showed individuals standing up to bullies and corrupt officials. They showed communities helping each other during hard times. For German soldiers raised to believe that only absolute obedience to the state could create order, these ideas were revolutionary. Could a society really function when people were allowed to think and choose for themselves? The evidence was right in front of them. America was not only functioning, but winning the war. Some prisoners began to question what they had been told about their enemies. If the Americans were really as weak and degenerate as Nazi propaganda claimed, how had they built such a powerful military? How could they afford to feed their prisoners better than some German soldiers ate in the field? Letters home became careful exercises in coded language. Prisoners couldn't write directly about their doubts, but families, reading between the lines, sensed something had changed. Sons and husbands who had left home full of Nazi certainty now wrote about strange experiences and confusing kindness from their captors. The movie nights created unexpected bonds between guards and prisoners. American soldiers would sometimes stay to watch films they had already seen, just to observe the German reactions. They saw grown men weep during sad scenes, cheer during action sequences, and laugh until their sides hurt during comedies. These moments of shared humanity made it harder for both sides to maintain the hatred that war demanded. Not every prisoner was transformed by Hollywood magic. Die-hard Nazis dismissed the films as Jewish propaganda designed to weaken German resolve. They tried to convince others to boycott the screenings. But their voices grew smaller each week as more men chose Charlie Chaplin over political lectures. The variety of American films revealed the complexity of American culture. Prisoners saw movies that celebrated rural values and others that glorified city life. Films that honored tradition and others that pushed boundaries. Stories about rich people and stories about the poor. This diversity confused men who had been raised to believe that strong nations required total uniformity of thought and culture. How could America be powerful when its people seemed to believe so many different things?
The answer came slowly. Maybe strength didn't require everyone to think exactly the same way. Maybe diversity was actually a source of power, not weakness. As months passed, the movie nights became the highlight of camp life. Prisoners would finish their work details quickly to secure good seats. They would discuss upcoming films with the excitement of children planning Christmas morning. Some began keeping diaries, documenting every film they saw, describing plots, actors, and their own reactions. These diaries became treasures, proof of an experience so surreal they sometimes wondered if they had dreamed it all. The impact went beyond individual entertainment. The films were teaching German prisoners about American values without any heavy-handed lecturing. Democracy, individual freedom, social mobility, and optimism about the future were woven into every story. When characters in American films faced corrupt officials, they fought back through legal means or public pressure. When they encountered injustice, they organized communities to demand change. When they met obstacles, they found creative solutions rather than waiting for orders from above. These lessons sunk in slowly, almost unconsciously. Prisoners began to imagine what life might be like in a country where ordinary people had such power and freedom. The war's end brought mixed emotions. Some prisoners were eager to return home and reunite with families they hadn't seen in years. Others dreaded leaving the comfort and safety of American camps for the bombed ruins of German cities. Many knew that the stories they would tell about their captivity would sound unbelievable to families who had endured years of bombing, starvation, and fear. How could they explain that they had spent evenings laughing at American comedies while their hometowns were being destroyed? The transport ships that carried them back across the Atlantic were filled with quiet conversations about their experiences. Men who had arrived in America as committed Nazi soldiers now spoke in hushed tones about the films that had changed how they saw the world. Some worried they would be accused of betraying their country by enjoying enemy entertainment. Others wondered if they could ever be truly happy again in a place without the freedom and abundance they had glimpsed on American movie screens. Back in Germany, their stories spread in whispers through villages and towns. Returning POWs described the impossible abundance of American camps, the food, the medical care, the recreation facilities, and most unbelievably, the movie nights. Many civilians refused to believe these accounts. How could America treat its enemies better than Germany treated its own soldiers? The stories seemed like fantasy or deliberate lies designed to make their suffering seem less important. But the evidence kept accumulating. Too many men told similar stories. Too many details matched. Slowly the truth sank in. America really had entertained its German prisoners with Hollywood films. For some former prisoners, the memory of those movie nights became a secret source of hope during the difficult years of post-war reconstruction. When life in bombed-out Germany felt hopeless, they remembered the abundance and optimism they had seen on American screens. They remembered characters who overcame impossible odds through courage and determination. They remembered communities that came together to solve problems. They remembered a vision of life where individual dreams mattered and anything seemed possible. Some former POWs became advocates for democracy and Western values during Germany's Reconstruction. When asked about their political transformation, many pointed to those nights in American camps when Hollywood had shown them a different way of living. The movie nights had accomplished something no amount of propaganda could have achieved. They had humanized America for its enemies. They had shown German soldiers that their captors were not the monsters they had been taught to hate, but people who valued creativity, humor, and human dignity. Years later, historians would recognize those prison camp movie nights as an early example of cultural diplomacy. America had won German hearts and minds, not through force or lectures, but through the simple act of sharing their stories. The projector screens in those makeshift prison theaters had been windows into American values. Through them, German POWs had glimpsed a society built on different principles than their own. A society where individuals mattered, where creativity flourished, and where even enemies could be treated with unexpected kindness. Klaus, the soldier who had first stared in disbelief at that white sheet on the wall, later became a teacher in post-war Germany. He would often tell his students about the American guards who had shown German prisoners Hollywood films during the darkest days of the war. They could have left us to sit in silence. Instead, they shared their dreams with us. They showed us that even in wartime, humanity could survive. Those movies taught me more about freedom than any political speech ever could. The legacy of those prison camp movie nights lived on in the thousands of German men who carried Hollywood memories back to their homeland. In barbershops and beer halls, in schools and churches, they told stories of American abundance and kindness that slowly changed how Germans thought about their former enemies. The white sheets came down, the projectors were packed away, but the images remained forever burned into the memories of men who had learned that their enemies were capable of unexpected grace. In the end, perhaps that was America's greatest weapon. Not its bombs or bullets, but its willingness to show enemy soldiers that a different way of life was possible. A way based on hope instead of hate, creativity instead of conformity, and the radical idea that even prisoners of war deserved a few hours of joy. The movie nights were over, but for thousands of German men, the real show was just beginning. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to build the kind of society they had glimpsed through the magic of American cinema. A society where laughter could echo even behind barbed wire, and where the light of human dignity could shine even in the darkest places.